Martica Heaner. I'm an adjunct associate professor at Hunter College in New York, and I'm the author of several books, and I've been a fitness instructor for almost 40 years. I started as a vegetarian. I've been vegan for about 10 years. I don't have my exact veganiversary because I don't remember there wasn't an exact one moment, but I was vegetarian. I went vegetarian when I was 15 years old, but it really started before that, sort of gradually inching my way there. When I was 11 years old, I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. I was in 6th grade, and that book is a book that was written in 1906, and it was meant to highlight the problems that immigrant factory farm workers who were working in slaughterhouses in Chicago faced during that time, where they were really abused and they had horrible lives and everything. But in writing the book, Upton Sinclair, he was trying to highlight the plight of the immigrants, but in fact, he also shed light to what the cows in those slaughterhouses endured, and it was horrific. And that led to the first federal Food Safety Act that, after that book came out, because there was a public uproar. And I read that as 11 years old, and I had no idea really about how cows were treated or anything like that. And it was horrifying. So I stopped eating a lot of meat, or most different kinds of meat. And my mother was always kind of insisting I eat it. But then when I was 15, I read a health book that said meat was bad for you. So I gave it up, didn't eat meat for 32 years as a vegetarian, but I ate a lot of dairy. And I assumed I was doing it for the animals, but I also didn't know what I didn't know. And I think that's very common, and certainly among people who are not vegan and think they could never go vegan, which are a lot of people. I always thought I was doing the right thing by the animals because I wasn't eating meat. And I really didn't know what happened to dairy cows. And I also never made the connection about leather or any other kind of animal products that I might be using. And I remember people would say to me, "Oh, but your purse is leather." And my response was, "Well, but the animal's dead anyway." So I didn't make the connection. And I think that can happen. And then sometimes you just have an aha moment. But so I would even donate to PETA, but then they'd send me their magazines and I wouldn't read them. And I wouldn't read them because I knew they were depressing and awful, and I didn't want to know because I thought I was already doing the right thing. So it's a perfect example of the arrogance we can have without realizing it. We don't know what we don't know. And I think it's sometimes important to remember that when we're trying to, encourage friends and family and others to go plant-based or vegan, because they kind of make assumptions about things without knowing the full, factual evidence about anything that goes on with animals. But so I was plodding along as a vegetarian, happy and healthy. I did eat tons of vegetables, but I ate dairy every day for sure. And I had asthma. And my asthma was not, it was bad enough to require 2 inhalers. I was on Advair, which is like the chronic inhaler you have every day, and then albuterol, which is the emergency inhaler. So if you're having like shortness of breath, you take that one and it helps alleviate the symptoms, you're breathing right away. And I was just taking those inhalers, and my doctor kept telling me it was my cat. And I had had 2 cats that were my babies, and one died. So I now had 50% less cat, but my asthma was worsening. And I kept insisting to my doctor, "I don't think it's my cat. I will bury my nose in his tummy and all his fur, and I don't have a reaction to it immediately from doing that." And he kept saying it was my cat. And so I thought, well, I love my cat. His name was Fred, and I'm not giving up my cat, so I'm just gonna stick with these inhalers. So then it wasn't until one day, and I'm not sure what precipitated this, but I was in Connecticut at a farmer's market, and I got an iced coffee with milk in it. And I took one sip, and immediately my throat started closing up. I had an anaphylactic reaction, and I couldn't breathe. I literally thought I was gonna die. And I was just standing there literally thinking I was about to die because I could not breathe, and it's a terrible feeling when you're feeling suffocated. But then luckily it just subsided as fast as it came on. And I was looking at my iced coffee and I'm like, what was that? Was that the milk? And by this point, I had a PhD. I had studied nutrition, and I didn't really know about the connection between dairy and asthma. I should have. It's a shame that I hadn't learned that at that point, but I hadn't. And I think that's very common for educated people, even educated dietitians and people with a medical or nutrition background. There's just certain information they're not presented with. And I went home and I looked up dairy and asthma, and sure enough, there's a lot of research making the connections. And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna try giving up dairy and see what happens. And just one thing that was interesting about that, though, is I took one sip. There's so many people that say, oh, everything in moderation, I only eat a little. Well, one sip was enough to literally cause me to stop breathing. Whereas I had been having dairy every day. So it's kind of weird. I don't know why that triggered it that one time, but whatever. I gave up dairy. I gave it up for a year. And I never used my inhalers, either one, for a year. That was kind of amazing. I basically cured my asthma. But then I started missing cheese. And this was back in the days, so basically about 10 years ago, when there was no vegan cheese, or there was some rubbery, terrible vegan cheese. So I started eating cheese. And I remember one night I went to a Mexican restaurant and ate some nachos, and they were really good. And I came home, and then I noticed I had like a reaction in the next 2 or 3 hours. I had phlegm in my throat, and I would notice every time I ate cheese, because I then decided, well, okay, I can live with that. I really like cheese, and I'll just eat it sometimes. But then I would notice if I ate a lot, it would clog my airways, and it would give me asthma. So then I was still kind of like, well, I mean, that sucks, but I'll still keep eating cheese because I like cheese. But then I came across a video. The first video, I think, was the PETA video with Paul McCartney. If slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be a vegetarian, meaning everyone would be a vegan. They used to call vegans vegetarians, right? I saw that, and that was 3 minutes, but it was horrific, and those images seared in my mind. And then I started learning just about dairy cows. And what I didn't realize was that far from being benign or doing the right thing by being a vegetarian, I was creating the veal industry, because every male dairy cow, there's no space or function for a male dairy cow, they become veal. So the little babies are stolen from their mothers on the first day, they're born, and they become veal. And then the mothers, the dairy cows, whereas normally their lifespan is about 20 years, they collapse in an exhausted, battered heap at about 4 years old, and that is known in the industry as a spent cow. They're picked up with a dump truck, scooped up, and then they become cheap hamburger meat at McDonald's or other fast food places. So what I didn't realize as a vegetarian, thinking I was doing the right thing by animals, by not eating them and by not eating cows, I was actually creating the veal industry, and I was creating the fast food meat industry. And so that's when I decided, to actually give up dairy. And I've never regretted it since. It's been about 10 years. Now we have really delicious artisan vegan cheeses. So if you want cheese, you can have some really good cheese. There's cheaper cheeses, some good, some not so good. But pretty much every dairy product has now been replicated in some way. So you really don't miss anything by giving up dairy. My biggest regret is having not done it sooner, having spent 32 years of my life contributing to the suffering of dairy cows without realizing it.
Some people have transitional difficulties, and you study nutrition. I imagine you probably didn't have any transitional difficulties, but I don't want to assume that. Was it easy to give up these foods and replace them with something? Did you have to find something to replace them with?
So that's a good question. And I'm always asked, do I miss meat? Do I miss chicken or fish? To be honest, because I became a vegetarian at 15 years old, and even starting at 11 years old, I was eating fewer and fewer animal foods in terms of meat, and I never ate fish that I recall. My mother says I did when I was little, but I don't ever remember eating fish because it smelled, and I didn't like it. It was it wasn't appealing at all. So I don't actually miss meat. And I think I'm an anomaly. I'm an outlier. Most people, it's natural to miss those things you're used to eating and those flavors you're used to. I personally don't eat veggie burgers. I've never tried the Impossible Burger or Beyond Meat or any of that, or Gardein. All of those products, I think that it's amazing they're out there and they're great transition foods for people. And as a nutrition professor, I do recommend them because, the first thing people need to do to be able to succeed is enjoy what they're eating. And if that's a way to help you enjoy what you're eating and eliminate actual animals from the process, then that's good. A lot of people complain or criticize that those are processed, highly processed, and it really depends on what you're eating. There's so many different varieties and brands, and you can make a bean burger that's actually super, super nutritious, and it's not highly processed. Some of them are, but how is that worse than eating, I don't know, a tortured cow that's been pumped full of hormones and antibiotics and all sorts of things? I'm not sure why people think that's more natural. Or a fish that's floating around the sea with toxins being absorbed into its flesh, or a chicken that has been living over its urine and feces in cramped conditions, never seeing sunlight. I mean, I think that there's a false perception that animal foods are natural and whole, and somehow that makes them healthy. There are nutrients in animal foods, but I don't think they're necessarily better than some of the transition foods that are in the plant-based space.
No, but I'm just wondering, did you have to fill any sort of void there at all? Not necessarily because you were craving it or anything, just what did you eat instead?
Right. Well, so since meat wasn't a problem because I wasn't missing meat. I mean, I ate a lot of beans, legumes. So I really didn't have to give up meat. So I didn't have that dilemma, which a lot of people do. What do you substitute that with? But with dairy, there's delicious vegan ice creams. There, again, vegan cheeses. I think my craving for those things diminished to some degree because, you can get some really great ice creams if you want it, but it's not like I ate that every day anyway. Or the cheeses, there's some good vegan cheeses, but again, not eating that every day, probably not even every week, probably, if I go out to dinner, usually I rarely buy that stuff now, although I do a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. I may be unique or again, some people have a bigger problem if they've gone straight from a traditional American diet, standard American diet, to a plant-based diet.
Did you notice anything physiologically different or mentally or emotionally going from eating cheese to not eating cheese, or dairy, I should say?
Yeah. Well, I would say that I cured my asthma. So absolutely cured my asthma. And without doubt, it's now been 10 years and I haven't used inhalers. I have had a few instances where I've had shortness of breath, sometimes if I'll smell chemicals or something. So I clearly am prone, like it could come back. And I would imagine if I started eating cow dairy again, it would probably come back. But it's never a problem now. So
was there anything else that changed?
I always ate really, really healthfully. One reason I became a nutrition professor. So I always ate, even when I ate dairy, I was eating tons and tons of vegetables, like plates of beans and vegetables and fruit. And so, again, I'm a little bit of an outlier.
So you really didn't have any challenges per se either, right?
No, because I was always, one of the things and this is something I like to encourage people to reframe how they see food. We all want food that tastes good. And that's important because it needs to be a pleasurable experience. It's not just fuel, it's something that gives us pleasure. And but I often would eat things because they were healthy for me. And then because they were healthy for me, I'd eat them. And if you eat them enough, you learn to either make them the way you like them, and then you end up liking them and craving them. So I know I would go through different periods where I would be really into a certain thing. So I remember at some point I was into sauteed kale and artichoke hearts with lemon juice, salt and pepper and garlic, and it was really good. So I'd want to eat a lot of that. Or I used to love artichokes, and it's not that I don't love them, but I would say I'd go through like these periods where there was just some new thing, some new flavor, or some new way to cook a certain plant food that I would really get into and want to eat a lot of that. Or sauteed eggplant with lots of yummy spices on it. So I think that a lot of times people assume that when you eat this way, you're not going to have foods that are delicious, but you do. And in fact, it opens up a whole new world. And a lot of the flavors that you like about the meat that you consume, you can just transfer those same, spices and other ingredients to a plant, base, and you're going to love it just as much because it's really the herbs and spices, the flavorings that you like. You don't necessarily need the meat aspect of it.
Why do you think some people have difficulties transitioning?
So I think people have difficulties transitioning for a variety of reasons. It can be a lot of work to, one, eat in a new way, make new things at home if you're preparing your own foods. Especially the healthier you're trying to get, it can be more work because there's more chopping of vegetables. And even though it actually doesn't take that much time to cook vegetables or beans or whole grains, I think sometimes just when something's different, it's out of people's normal comfort zone. It's perceived to be that way. And they kind of don't know what to do. For example, whole grains. All you do with any whole grain, whether it's white rice, brown rice, quinoa, rye kernels, barley, amaranth, any of the whole grains out there. All you do is boil them in water. That's all you do. It's really not hard. And then, if you want, they're generally a bland thing, like rice is bland, right? You put seasoning, spices, whatever you want, and you can do anything with them to make them more flavorful, or you don't need to make them more flavorful. You just add something else to them, like a bunch of vegetables or different kinds of beans or tofu or whatever to create your dish. It's really simple, but if someone has not been used to doing that, it can seem just, how do I cook amaranth, right? It's really not hard, and it's actually really fast. And the smaller the grain is, the faster it is to cook. I mean, it literally could take 15 or 20 minutes to cook some of the smaller items, such as lentils. Lentils are really fast. Alternatively, you can just buy canned beans. I eat canned beans all the time. They're just so much faster and easier. You can buy frozen beans, also faster and easier because they're already, cooked or partly cooked, and you just heat them up for a certain amount of time. Vegetables, same thing. There's a lot of vegetables you can eat raw. Saying that, a lot of people don't like to eat raw vegetables, or they're not even sure. There's actually more vegetables than you can eat raw than you might suspect. And again, with most vegetables, all you do is, steam them or boil them in water, or you can grill them or roast them. You can, it's really not hard. And a lot of people get worried about doing things the right way. I mean, I think that, thankfully we have people like you on YouTube who are providing, information and education on how to do these things. And there's certainly a ton of cooking and recipe videos, websites, and YouTube videos where you can just find out, okay, here's an eggplant, what do I do with it? It's pretty easy. You really just boil it in water and add spices, right? Chop it up. There's certain ways you can do it to make things a little bit better or a little bit more tender or that kind of thing. But it's really not hard. So I think that first people have to realize there's a learning curve, because people tend to eat mono meals. They get used to the same thing. They eat the same breakfast every day. Maybe there's one of two things they might eat, same kind of meals. And sometimes it's a learning curve to jump out of that zone, start trying new things. Some people are averse to trying new things, but I think once you become plant-based, you do actually become more open-minded and discover how many things you like. Another thing that can be prohibitive is the cost of things, especially if people are buying the processed vegan foods, like the frozen vegan foods, or just going to restaurants. Vegan restaurants tend to be on the higher end, although I think we have some fast food restaurants that are now opening up across the country, not widespread enough yet, that are starting to do more plant-based or vegan items, or just regular fast food places that are offering them, which I think is a good thing. And then there's, cultural and familial influences that can make it difficult to do something different and stick to it. So that's why it's always good if you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, partner, father, mother, whoever you might live with, if they go on board with you. And sometimes that's not easy because they don't necessarily want to. There's a lot of battles out there, but ultimately, most people experience the benefits and then they become, it's not even an option to not do it.
Do you think there might be something going on physiologically also that makes it a little more challenging? Some people claim they got a detox period or something and they might misinterpret that, or maybe they go completely straight into eating beans and are not acclimated to it, or microbiome, whatever. Is there any of that stuff going on that people might have a hard time understanding?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of a detox, that is kind of a term that's thrown out a lot, and it's unclear what it really even means. A detox can be also something like, caffeine withdrawal, like you're getting headaches because maybe you've switched to green smoothies and suddenly you're not drinking the coffee in the morning that you normally drink, and you're having withdrawal from caffeine. I think people can misinterpret some of those things. I know that people say they experience detox symptoms when they start eating healthier. I don't think we have any research showing that happens. Maybe if someone has literally been eating lots of meat and processed food, there are some kind of chemicals embedded in their body and they're released. I'm not sure if that would happen all in the first week. When we have toxins in our body, it tends to be stored in fat. Unless you're losing weight, not sure that you're releasing toxins by that happening, just in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. I don't know if there's any truth to the detox claim, although, it can make people feel better. Now, the fiber claim certainly is a bona fide one that people feel like they get gas if they're eating, too many beans too fast. I think with beans, you have an awful lot, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people eating beans who are not having those symptoms. So it's not a given that you're going to have those symptoms. And I think there's a couple of things you can do to make those symptoms not happen. Not one is obviously starting with lower amounts, gradually working your way up, but also it's the way you prepare them. So there's that soapy stuff in the water of beans when you're cooking them, when you're rinsing them out in a can, and there's some compounds in there. One of them is called saponins. And if you rinse that really well, that should help some gas. Now you can use that also and create in the chickpeas and create the, I forgot what it's called.
Like a dessert or something?
What?
Is it a dessert? Oh yeah, aquafaba.
Aquafaba, yeah. Yeah, and then just making sure they're well cooked. Like if you have beans should be smooth and creamy. They shouldn't be hard. So if they're hard, you might be having that reaction because they're just not cooked well enough.
Some people might think, well, that's not very natural if you have to cook it. But you could sprout them, right? And that gets rid of the lectins, phytates, saponins, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about like raw vegans. I think this claim that legumes are not digestible, if we didn't have lots of evidence that the healthiest populations and people on earth are eating legumes and beans as part of their daily diet and having the lowest, rates of chronic disease and the highest longevity and quality of life in older ages, the healthiest people are eating these things not just once a month, but every day. In fact, what they're eating very sparingly is animal products.
Not a valid concern.
Yeah, and as far as eating, if we think about what we're designed to eat, right, anatomically and physiologically, and I know you've had Dr. Milton Mills, you've interviewed him, and he's awesome, and he talks about the physiology of humans. I mean, I think we're clearly herbivores. We're commonly called omnivores. Probably, arguably, we're insectivores. We're probably designed to eat insects, and many cultures around the world do. And, if you look at what we could eat and capture, and nobody, even the biggest football player on the planet, could not jump on a cow and rip it apart and bite into the cow and eat it. I mean, it's just not possible.
We might have been scavengers a little bit.
Well, I don't know. We can't eat old meat because we'll get sick from it. Yeah. We'll get sick from all the flies on it, all the worms in it, all the bacteria, all the pathogens. So we are not designed to scavenge either. I mean, if we did, what would our natural response be to seeing a dead deer on the road? It would be, dinner, as opposed to like look away in horrifying disgust at seeing a crushed possum on the road or something. My cat, all of my cats would see that and be like, yum, let me go sniff it, right? We don't want to sniff it. I think that, our inherent intrinsic reactions kind of tell us what is appealing. And I know Dr. Bernard has, said, put in a carrot and a rabbit with a baby, and he wants to eat the carrot and play with the rabbit, right?
Somebody recently said, and a vegan I interviewed, he doesn't like being called herbivore because he feels like we truly are omnivores because we're capable of eating animals. That doesn't mean we should ethically at all.
Well, not only ethically, but we're designed to be able to withstand a lot of adversity, and our body has lots of compensation mechanisms to help us cope when things are not optimal in our environment, including what we're eating. Another example of that is we can also eat Cheetos, and we can also eat Doritos, and we can also eat lots of food and go for decades eating those foods. We're capable of eating those foods. Another aspect of being an omnivore, right? We can eat meat and fish and animal products. We're capable of eating those foods. And there's even nutrients in those foods. There's nutrients in hay. We could probably eat hay if it was kind of pulverized and then put into a smoothie. We can't, as it is, just chomp on hay, right? But there's a lot of nutrients in foods that we could eat, but it doesn't mean it's optimal. And so eating a lot of meat, while there are nutrients in meat, that's indisputed. Based on our anatomy and physiology, it's very clear we're not designed to eat meat. And the only way we can eat meat is if it's captured with tools, prepared with tools, cooked. We can't eat raw meat. And if we eat raw meat, well, they prepare it, right? They don't just take it.
Some people will straight up eat raw red meat.
Our claws, the Guinness Book of World Records has the people with the longest fingernails. Our fingernails are flat and flimsy, and when they grow, they become curly, as you see in those Guinness Books of World Records, right? We can't rip things apart with our claws. We have no claws. And number one, I think intrinsically, that's not appealing to us. It's kind of disgusting to us, which is why nobody wants to see all that side of cooking and meat and slaughter, right?
In a dire situation where that was all you had, it might not be as disgusting, but when we have options, it truly is barbaric and grotesque. I see what you're saying, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, well, posed with that desert island question, yeah. I still would not eat the animal. I don't know, maybe there's a different, one of the things about becoming vegan was, if you talk about like a psychological change, was that I realized how really insignificant I am as a human, and I'm not the top of the universe, and I'm not more important than others. And I think that we are raised to think we are, and certainly religions teach us to believe we are, and therefore we can do whatever we want to others and justify it somehow.
Well, the Maasai, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they, for example, I've seen documentaries on this where, they live off of, eating animals, and they've made tools to do this from nature, but they don't have the same quality of life and lifespan and health span that we have. Obviously, like you said, it's not optimal in our modern society, and it's not sustainable either, right? That's why we have concentrated animal feeding operations, because it's not sustainable.
It's hard to see a validity in why we should be eating animals from a physiological standpoint. Now, there's some people that say, our brains got bigger once we started eating meat. But, they found with like fossilized poop from Paleolithic man that they were eating an estimated 100 grams of fiber a day. That's what a whole food plant-based vegan eats. So what that shows is that while they may have caught a bison and feasted for that day that they caught him because they had no refrigeration, right? They couldn't really save that meat for later. They were maybe binging all at one time, but for the vast majority of their time, they were eating plants. That's otherwise their fiber intake wouldn't have been that high.
Yeah, and amylase.
Right, so we have several, there's all sorts of physiological reasons that show that we are designed, one, to eat plants and to eat the carbohydrates that plants contain. And the first sign is that we have a digestive enzyme in our saliva called amylase. We also have that same enzyme that's released from the pancreas in our small intestine. And the purpose of the amylase enzyme is to start breaking down carbohydrates that we eat. So if we weren't meant to be eating them, we wouldn't have this enzyme in our mouth the minute food goes in it. We also have lipase, which is the fat enzyme that helps with fat breakdown. That's also in our saliva.
Now, some of the carnivores argue that the lipase is to break down animal fat.
Well, plants have fat in, all plants have fat in them. So
There you go.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. The misconception too, and the big problem I have, I'm a nutrition professor, and I try to, emphasize this with my students, and I get very distressed at the end of the semester when they finish their dietary analysis project, which is for the intro to nutrition class, what they do, and they walk away saying, I need to eat fewer carbs and more protein. Because, I keep saying, it's like, you're not eating carbs, you're not eating protein, you're eating foods, and foods contain 1, 2, or 3 of the macronutrients. Usually they have 2 or 3 of the macronutrients. So fats, carbs, and protein. Every plant food has fats, carbs, and protein. And animal foods contain fats and protein. There's very few foods that just have one. So fat would be something like oils, where you've sucked the fat out of something. Only carbs would be like sugar, processed. So both oil and sugar are processed. And only protein would be, like a protein powder that doesn't taste good because it has nothing else added to it. So, we don't really eat those kind of things. So everything we eat has macronutrients. So we're eating foods, and they have different distributions or proportions of the different macronutrients.
Let's talk about fiber a second. For lack of a better word, some of the opposition says that we're not designed to consume fiber, we're trying to get rid of it, and we can't properly metabolize it or whatever. And
so fiber is currently not considered to be an essential nutrient. So we have a list of essential nutrients that have been identified in research to be associated with nutrient deficiencies or health conditions if we don't get a certain amount. And it's up for debate how much of each one we need. That's, based on research, some old, some newer, some flawed, some we need more information. Fiber is one of those things that it's only been recently recognized just how important fiber is to our body. In fact, it used to be thought that fiber was just like a bulking agent, and it helped, you expand your food being digested, going through your small intestine and colon, and push it along. So basically cause poop to become poop and help it come out easily and help you not have constipation. Now we know that that is one function of fiber, but its most important function is that it is fuel for the beneficial bacteria and other microorganisms in our gut. And something known as the microbiome, which is now considered to be an organ within our body because there are so many trillions of microorganisms, primarily in our colon, but elsewhere in our body as well. And they have all sorts of systemic effects everywhere in our body and play huge roles in whether we have inflammation in our body, all sorts of things. And it's such a new area of research that there's a lot we don't know. But one of the things we do know is that plant foods feed the beneficial bacteria. They ferment it. And without it there, some of the bacteria that tend to produce a more inflammatory effect elsewhere in our body, those can flourish. I predict, so our current recommendations for fiber are that you have, depends on how much you eat, but roughly 25 to 35 grams a day of fiber. A whole food plant-based vegan will eat 60 to 100 grams of fiber. And it kind of depends on how many calories you're eating, right? But if I see, when I'm looking at my dietary analyses of people I might consult with or students who are doing their dietary analysis as part of the class, if I see a vegan or vegetarian who's getting like 35 grams of fiber, they're eating mostly processed food. They're not eating that healthy. And you know, they're eliminating the detrimental animal foods, but they will be eating a lot of processed plant foods, basically junk food. I think that as we accumulate more research, that we're gonna see fiber be listed as an essential nutrient and the fiber recommendations bump up. And I think that at least 40 to 60 grams a day will become the recommendation. One thing that is interesting is that there was actually at least one study done that I know of where they measured body odor in people who ate meat, and people who eat meat have body odor and worse body odor. And the reason for that is because there's a higher proportion of sulfur-containing amino acids in animal products. And sulfur is that rotten egg smell. It's not that those amino acids are not in plant foods. They are, because all the essential amino acids are in all plant foods. But it's that there's much higher proportions of these specific sulfur-containing amino acids, like methionine, in animal foods. So if you eat a lot of meat, you're getting much more of those amino acids. I think that every vegan that I've come across, and I certainly have noticed this, is that vegans don't smell. They don't have body odor. They don't have armpit odor. People that eat a lot of meat smell. And
There has been a study comparing the two, I thought you said.
there's been a study comparing body odor. It wasn't comparing vegans with animal eaters. It was just having people eat more meat, and then they had testers rate their armpit odor. Anecdotally, there's a very well-known low-carb diet doctor who I have known from the obesity world, because I've been active in the obesity research world. And I remember a few years back hanging out with him and other people at a conference, one of those after parties after the lectures all day. And you know, he's a super nice guy, will remain unnamed. I remember he had terrible body odor, and he's come out very pro-carnivore. He's very famously pro-low carb, and it was hard to stand next to him because he smelled.
Sometimes if I eat a lot of garlic, I might.
Certainly garlic and some of those spices you can smell like that. Yeah. But I think that's different than, I mean, garlic can be a bad smell, but
I like it.
But yeah, some people love garlic, and I think there's some genetic predispositions to react to garlic. But just like cilantro, like some people think it tastes terrible, some people don't have that same taste of it. But I think that body odor is universally unpleasant. And then the other thing too is someone who is doing keto, and they have the release of ketones in their breath, which is a kind of sour, fruity, bad odor. You know that, you know, if someone has both of those things going on, it's not pleasant to be around. So yeah, if you're in ketosis, it's a fruity, it's a stale, fruity kind of yuck. Why do dogs eat poop, right? So that's something that's interesting. Like everybody's always thought, oh, that's disgusting, and they try to prevent their dogs from eating it. I suspect at some point we're going to have some research about that we now know there's potentially beneficial microorganisms in poop. Maybe that's why dogs are attracted to poop. I don't know about other animals eating poop. We obviously don't want to eat poop, but you know, some of the research has been having fecal implants, and usually that's done, it's, you know, they're not literally feeding someone poop. They turn it into a pill someone swallows, or they can implant it. And that's meant to be like a probiotic kind of supplement. And when they've done that, vegan poop apparently is the healthiest poop they can use because it has the most beneficial microorganisms in it. So that again is, you know, evidence, I think, that eating plants is the way to go. Lots of different aspects about our digestive system show that we should be eating plants over animal products. Number one, the length. So the length of our digestive system is so long and so much surface area that allows it to have maximum absorption. And also, it's a pretty slow process. Carnivores, whether that be a cat or omnivores, even as in a dog, have much, much shorter digestive systems. The food goes in and out of them. And why? Because they eat meat. They're designed to eat meat and raw meat, right? And that has all sorts of bacteria. So the faster it can get out, the better. And the acidity in their stomachs is also much higher. They're hydrochloric acid than a human's. Higher as in stronger, more acidic. That, again, is to help kill all the bugs that are in the meat that they are designed to eat. We don't have that same equipment or capability, so therefore we can't eat raw meat. I mean, in some instances where they're eating raw fish and raw meat, generally it has to be prepared carefully. Anecdotal evidence it's definitely interesting and useful. It tells us what might be possible. And, we all have anecdotal stories, my curing my asthma when I gave up dairy. There hasn't been much research on the carnivore diet. There was recently a study that came out, and it's funny because I saw some videos on YouTube that were extolling how, great the carnivore diet was based on this one study that was done. And it was very misleading the way the people on these videos were reporting on this study, because there are a lot of problems with this study that the study authors even noted when they were noting the limitations of their results. They basically took around 2,000 people and surveyed them and asked them to report what was their experience doing the carnivore diet for at least 6 months. And on average, it was like almost a year and a half that most people were doing it. One major problem with the study, with their study sample, was that they basically went to websites and groups like on Twitter or Facebook or social media and found people who were strongly identifying as carnivores, and they got those people to fill out these surveys. So what that was automatically doing was selection bias, because those people are actively participating in those groups, they are showing some positive effects of following that diet, which shows there might be some benefits, right?
Yeah, because if somebody wasn't having positive, they wouldn't even be there to be a part of the sample.
Exactly. So it's known as a convenience sample. So it's kind of like if I was going to do an exercise study and I wanted to say, okay, I want these people to do this high intensity interval training workout, I'm doing a high intensity interval training workout, and then other people are doing nothing. Who wants to be in this study? And so I could get some people, to raise their hands and, okay, who wants to do the exercise group? Well, all the people that like exercise, that want to exercise, that are good at exercise are probably going to volunteer for that group. And all the people that don't want to exercise and hate exercise or aren't good at it or they're unfit, they're going to be in the non-exercise group if I allowed them to self-select participation in the study. So that's one reason that we don't just generally pick a convenient sample. We try to randomly select people from a representative sample, and then we randomly assign them to different groups. So this particular study, it wasn't really a study, it was just a poll. It was like a poll. Okay, everyone who eats only meat, according to you, we're not even measuring what you eat. Let's answer some questions. So I know that one of the YouTube video was extolling the benefits of the study and how it proved how healthy carnivore was. And that YouTube video mentioned that they even got lab results. Well, in fact, that person didn't read the study properly, because they did not get lab results. They got people to self-report what they said their lab results were. So everything about this study was self-report. So that means it's not really an objective study. We cannot rely on that information. Saying that, it shows, though, that there are a lot of people who have reported benefits from eating a carnivore diet. And, there's probably a lot of reasons for that. And I don't deny that that's possible. There was actually a professor who went on a Twinkie diet. It was back about, I think, 5 years ago or something. And I think he was at the University of Kansas, and he ate a bunch of Twinkies every day and all sorts of processed food, very high in carbohydrates, high in fat, high in sugar, all the things that, we all know you shouldn't be eating. And he also took a protein supplement and a vitamin supplement because he didn't want to become nutrient deficient by all the processed foods. But and he lost 27 pounds in one month. His cholesterol went down. He had some health benefits. I think it was 1 month, maybe it was 6 weeks. I don't remember now. But anyway, so you can eat, again, what's optimal versus what our body can cope with and we can, adapt to. So obviously a Twinkie diet is not optimal. And long term, if he did that for 10 years, we're probably going to see a bunch of, chronic diseases start to manifest. With the carnivore diet, yes, there are nutrients in meat. So there was another paper, there's really no research on the carnivore diet. There was another review paper that was sort of looking at, can you get the nutrients you need from a carnivore diet? And, we just don't really have the evidence that you can. And the review paper was sort of kind of speculating on different nutrients and, there might be present in animal foods, but can you actually get enough of them? And, and there's some talk about, well, maybe, your absorption ability increases. So if there's less present, your body is going to absorb more. And that may be the case. That can be the case for any kind of diet, right? And our body does adapt and tries to get what it needs from what we give it. So I think with the carnivore diet, my educated guess is that it's an elimination diet. So people are, you can benefit from an elimination diet. In that sense, it's clean. You're cutting out lots of things, including lots of processed food and junk food. And now, how will you do from the lack of what we do get from plant foods, such as not just the essential nutrients, vitamins and minerals we know we need, and fiber we know we need, the phytochemicals. So phytochemicals are another branch of nutrient. They are plant compounds that are shown to have beneficial effects on our health. And many of them are antioxidants. That means they protect against inflammation and cancer. And maybe yet another reason why eating a high plant-based diet is protective against many diseases involved with inflammation and cancer. So we don't know what the long-term effects, though, of not ingesting that are. And so we don't have a study, just tracking people over time and actually measuring them and getting their lab results. And in that survey where they surveyed the 2,000-ish people, all these people reported health benefits. Health benefits come with weight loss. So again, if you're losing weight by eating Twinkies or if you're losing weight by eating steak, you can still see health benefits. It's the long-term effects of nutrient, having too much of the bad nutrients and not enough of the good nutrients. So the bad nutrients being saturated fat, which we know causes, plaque in the arteries and other issues with inflammation. Weight loss itself causes improvements. But over time, what happens when you're having chronic nutrient deficiencies or chronic overload of those things in food that are inflammatory or potentially detrimental? We don't have those studies.
We do have studies showing that plants are beneficial.
We have specific things like let's give people several oranges a day or citrus and see what happens to their risk of colds and flu, or let's give people increased fiber and see if their constipation improves. It does. Have them eat more legumes and see if various health things improve. Cholesterol drops, weight drops. So we have millions of different studies, I think. There's a lot of studies out there. Yeah. As far as looking at a whole food plant-based diet and a vegan diet and comparing it to other diets, we have some, and we have different kinds of studies that suggest, some are observational, so we can find correlations, such as the more fiber people eat, the more whole plant foods people eat, the lower their risk of being overweight or obese, the lower the risk of heart disease and diabetes and cancer. And then we do have randomized controlled trials where you are putting people on, certain diets and watching them over time and seeing beneficial health improvements. The problem with randomized controlled trials is, and this is the case with any diet, is it's really hard to do them long term. And when we're looking at things like outcomes like death, mortality, or morbidity, the diseases we develop that are all what we die from, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, you really have to do a study for, minimum 10 to 20 years, if not 30 or 40 years, because that's how long it takes for these diseases to progressively worsen and kill us for the most part. So, when we have a 6-month study on something, even that, we can get an idea perhaps of something hurting or helping us, but it's not the real story. And so with this observational survey where they just collected what people said about themselves following the carnivore diet, the majority reported having no, nutrient deficiencies or no signs of, clinical symptoms. That again is something that no one was measuring, and it may take time before the body being crippled by that diet would show the effects.
I liked your analogy, but to kind of maybe do that analogy over again. All right, I want to take 4,000 people and I want them to do this high intensity training. Then all of a sudden, all the ones that can't handle it, they get hurt, makes them sick, whatever, they drop out. Now you're going to do a survey on what's left.
Right.
That's what they did.
Right.
So we don't know anything about the detrimental aspect.
Well, and that's where a properly conducted study, even if it's an observational study done over time, where they would actually report the adherence or number of dropouts. And there's something called intention to treat, and this is done with drug studies. And they always will include at the end of the study the data from the people that did not complete the study. So they dropped out for some reason. And that is because, that's a more realistic analysis of the findings. But dropout and adherence is really important because, especially like with that carnivore study, so they got 2,000 people who all, or not all, but the vast majority reported all these great benefits. Maybe there were 10,000 people who've done it, who in fact got all sorts of adverse effects, but that survey didn't capture any of that because they chose a convenience sample and they chose, people who were, very gung-ho and, saying that, it did show that some people can experience benefits. And, then we have to tease out, well, why is that? And I do think it's probably something about the weight loss itself produces benefits and something about the elimination diet. And we just don't know long-term if that's going to be healthy. At the very least, we know they're probably going to smell.
So, all in all, it sounds like the totality of evidence clearly points at eating plants exclusively. Would you say?
I do believe we are exclusively designed to eat plants. The one argument against that is the fact that vitamin B12 is not present in our current day food system in plants. It's also an issue for farm animals. Farm animals are supplemented with B12. All humans are recommended to start supplementing after the age of 50 because there's all sorts of issues. And this isn't, just vegans. This is people eating meat. B12 appears to be a problem universally with farm animals, with omnivores, and it can certainly be lacking in vegans. So the fact that we are recommended to supplement it, I don't think indicts the fact that we are designed to eat a plant-based diet. It appears that in other times when we had a different food system and different quality of soil where there were more microorganisms, or it might even be that, in past times, we probably ate some insects with our plant foods, right? If you just had a big farm and you're eating things, who knows? We didn't have strong faucets, with great water pressure and everyone's able to clean things really appropriately. We probably got some sort of insects, whether it's aphids, and there's probably a little bit of B12 in an aphid or something. I don't know. We don't have studies on that. But I think that absolutely we have physiological and anatomical evidence. We have nutritional evidence. And we even have psychological evidence that we're really, I think, primarily designed to eat plant foods. We're attracted to the beautiful colors in plant foods. We're not attracted to roadkill. When we see something bloody, a lot of people who eat meat can't eat rare meat because it's disgusting to them. The smell of fish is unappealing to most people, even those people that love eating fish. And we don't have the equipment to just kill it and rip it apart and bite into it. We don't have fangs. Our fangs allow us to eat an apple, not tear apart flesh and feathers and not choke on the fur and things that are in that skin of the animal.
Steakhouse syndrome. Have you heard of steakhouse syndrome?
No.
Yeah, it's a clinical term for choking on steak because it gets stuck in the esophagus or whatever.
Oh, like they eat a piece and don't chew it?
Yeah, it happens so frequently with steak, they call it that.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
I thought that was wild. It's steakhouse syndrome. They don't call it plant house.
Right. Tofu syndrome, yeah.
Back to B12. I've been told that if you're raised on a whole food plant-based diet, there's a chance some of that B12 might work up its way and become digestible. Have you ever heard of that? Because we have B12 in us. It's just not in a place where it can be absorbed. Not that I'm suggesting anybody depend on that.
Yeah. No, I think, I don't know if we know enough about that. And I don't even think it's been studied that I know of. The thing is, it's just easy to supplement with B12. And again, everyone, not just vegans, is recommended to supplement. And our farm animals are supplemented.
Yeah, you made all that clear. I just wanted to throw a couple things out there because there's other things too that the future holds in store potentially here. Like if we're raised vegan, this potentially might rectify itself. Also, some plants pull it up through the root system, like water lentils. You've probably heard of that. Maybe, have you? So water lentils have B12 in them. And then
there's some things that they're B12.
Analogs.
Yeah.
That's more seaweeds.
Yeah.
But I'm saying active form is in lentils.
Are you talking about, it's called Lentine. It's a supplement, and it's a really super great protein source, apparently.
So there's that, and then I've interviewed some raw vegans that don't supplement. Every day they're fermenting, and they get B12, they think, from that. Now, of course, we don't want to recommend anybody to this, but if you're on a raw diet and you're eating a lot of dirty fruits, and even well water, I've heard could potentially have enough B12 in it, because a lot of options that are natural were just removed from.
Yeah, I think, the fact that our food system, food travels distances, our food is so clean, our ability to clean our own food, any kind of microorganisms in dirt or insects are removed from what we eat, and arguably we would ingest some of that in other periods, and maybe people in other parts of the planet who are more, rural are getting that. I don't know. It's obviously an area we need to explore.
So what about fatty acids? Let's talk about that for a second.
Okay, one thing about nutrient absorption is that just in general, our body upregulates or downregulates based on what it needs. So, and then there's some talk about how, say, for example, iron. A common belief is that certain nutrients are more absorbable when they come from an animal food source. And heme iron is one of those. And in fact, I've read different things, but the absorption amount of heme iron is something like 25%, and non-heme iron, or iron that comes from plants, maybe 17%. So that's literally a teeny difference in absorption. And of note is that 100% of that heme iron is not being absorbed. So with anything we eat, and that's one reason why eating one meal a day, if we were to get all of the amounts of the recommended nutrients we needed in one meal, we wouldn't absorb 100% of it. And that includes protein. Like if you were to eat, depending on how much protein you think you need, let's say you need 50 grams of protein. Some people think they need 200 grams. But let's say you need 70 grams of protein. If you have that all in one meal, we don't absorb 100% of that in one meal. And that's every nutrient, right? So that's one reason we eat multiple times during the day. And one reason why people doing OMAD, 1 meal a day, intermittent fasting, again, we haven't studied that long term, but that may lead to nutrient deficiencies over time, because even if they were getting all they needed in that 1 meal, which they're probably not, then they're probably not absorbing enough of it. However, when our body is deficient in nutrients, whatever that is, it does upregulate its ability to absorb more of it. So that has been, the case has been made for carnivores, whereas they might not be getting much calcium from eating a lot of meat. It's been argued, well, they're probably absorbing more from what they are getting, and that might be true, but the same holds for, vegans as well. So any nutrients that might be at risk of being low, and if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, that's really only B12. It's only if you're eating a lot of junk food and maybe not enough calories that you're not going to be exposed to the amount of nutrients you need. Because the reality is, if you are eating a lot of healthy foods, you're getting way more than the recommended amounts. And then sometimes, like if you're a raw vegan, you might have to consciously, keep track of it and make sure you're eating certain things like nuts and seeds. Seeds are super nutritious, and I think we're going to learn more about seeds in the future because they are so incredibly nutritious. And one of my recommendations is to sprinkle all kinds of different seeds on everything, because you can pretty much add them to anything you're eating usually, and you're going to just boost your nutrient intake simply by doing that, and your protein intake, because they're high in protein.
Now, is it true that you might absorb too much heme iron and then it oxidizes?
So people that consume more animal products and therefore more heme iron have higher risks of different diseases, including diabetes and heart disease. Why that is, I don't know. There's lots of components of animal foods that create mechanisms for increased risk of different diseases like heart disease. So it's not just one thing. It's not just the saturated fat. It's not just the heme iron. It's not just the lack of fiber. It's, it could be any number of things. It's not just the effect on the microbiome, which we know that when you eat animal products and you're consuming the choline, it's going to be more likely to turn into TMAO, which is going to directly affect your blood vessels and inflammation. Whereas if you eat choline from plant foods, you don't have that same effect. And it appears, though, that even people who eat meat, the more plant foods they eat, they're ameliorating some of the negative effects of eating meat. So that's why, everybody should be eating more plant foods. Now, carnivores, again, another story. We need more research to show what happens long-term with that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that we necessarily need it, but apparently we're going to have to get it. Anyway, also on the iron, I've heard hepcidin, if you're raised vegan, you have less of that maybe, which helps absorb more non-heme iron.
I don't know specifically about that mechanism. Your body does what it needs to do to absorb more if it needs it. So it might be increasing, the levels of an enzyme that's going to help the absorbability of it. And I think for every nutrient, there's going to be probably a few mechanisms there about why that happens.
Nutrient density. Now, when I asked Dr. Neil Bernard about nutrient density, he was like, who cares? Every now and then, Gregor, though, he'll put out something, the most nutrient-dense foods or, greens or whatever. And then you hear in the comment section, no, it's liver. What are your thoughts on nutrient density? Does it matter?
Okay, well, my favorite example of nutrient density is broccoli and asparagus. So I've plugged into my favorite dietary food app is Chronometer. And the reason I like Chronometer is because it gives you the full nutrient list, all the essential nutrients and others, as well as the macronutrients, carbs, fat, and protein. So you can really see what you're getting. You have to be careful when you use Chronometer that you're choosing the food item from the list that pops up once you type in your food that comes from a database source that gives you all the nutrients. Because some of the nutrients that pop up only give you what's on the food label. They don't give you all 80 nutrients that could be in that food. So that's important when you're doing any of these apps. I'm not sure about some of the other dietary apps if they allow you to choose from different databases so you know you're getting all the information that you want.
On that real quick, is the USDA one the best, or which?
So usually the USDA and the NCC database are the ones in Chronometer that will give you the full nutrient list. And that usually will be 50 to 80 nutrients roughly. But it tells you how many nutrients you're getting whenever you pop the food up. Some of them only give you 15, which means, you might get the protein, the fat, the fiber, but you're not going to get the essential amino acids. So if you're tracking essential amino acids, it's going to look like you're getting fewer than you are if you don't choose the right item. And that's the most important thing, because I think I've seen with my students who do these analysis on themselves that they, they might be getting 150 grams of protein, but then they're getting, 10% of their amino acids, essential amino acids, but that's they're getting 800% or 500% of their essential amino acids, but they haven't chosen the right food item in Chronometer. If you ate broccoli, like 11 or 1,200 calories of broccoli, or asparagus, there's certain foods you could do this with, that's all you ate. Or maybe not all you ate, but you ate 1,100 calories or so of broccoli, you would get every single nutrient you need, including omega-3 fatty acids, including protein, including all the vitamins and minerals, barring B12 that we know about, from just eating that. That shows how nutrient dense those foods are, right? Now, that's a lot of broccoli. That's broccoli at every meal. That's broccoli soup. That's, lots of broccoli for snacks. It's a lot of broccoli, but it's possible, right? We can eat that in a pinch if we need to. But
it would be dangerous to eat that much broccoli. To the thyroid, nobody's recommending we just broccoli. We're just doing a comparison, right?
Yeah. The average person, it depends on your size and your activity level. But on average, most people eat about 2,000 calories a day. Now, if someone's highly active, they might eat 4,000 calories a day. If someone's severely overweight, they might eat 4,000 calories a day. If someone's small, they might eat 1,500 calories a day. So, but on average, we're saying it's 2,000 calories a day. But that's showing that if half of what you ate was a highly nutrient-dense plant food, you'd get all the nutrients you need, that you'd meet the recommendations. If you're eating 2,000 calories of a variety of whole plant foods, you're going to get what you need and then some. So when you plug in these things into an app like Chronometer that gives you all the essential nutrients, you'll see that you actually exceed your recommendations by, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So that goes back to the question of absorbability. If you're getting a lot of that nutrient, even if you don't absorb all of it, which you don't, you're still getting what you need. We're nutrifying ourselves, and all of our different plant-based doctors have different words for it, like Dr. Goldner and Dr. Furman, and all of our different doctors have a name for basically just hyper-nourishing yourself. And that's what we're doing when we eat whole plant foods. We're giving ourselves lots of nutrients, and we're giving every cell in our body what it needs to function properly and do what it does. There are some claims that there are anti-nutrients in food, and there are things that phytates or lectins or different components of plant foods that might have some sort of toxic effect on our body. Actually, some research has shown beneficial effects of some of these, quote, anti-nutrients. But also, if these foods were a problem, again, we wouldn't show that the healthiest people on the planet with the lowest rate of chronic diseases, who live the longest and are the healthiest generally, are eating a lot of these foods.
I did a comparison on this. I did it with kale, black beans, soy beans, and these all were powerful as anything in the animal kingdom. And so even getting the variety, you're still going to get all those nutrients. You don't have to do just broccoli or just kale or...
I think because of people marketing foods and products, and people in the media wanting something to write about, different foods are called superfoods, but there's, certain foods, all foods have all the nutrients, right? There's just different proportions of the nutrients in different foods. So one food might be higher in a certain nutrient than another, but in general, all plant foods are superfoods.
Goitrogens.
Oh, okay.
That's what's in the cruciferous potentially.
Yeah, and I don't remember, I've seen those studies like how much kale you have to eat for that to happen. I don't know. I mean,
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Like oxalates, you'd have to eat, I mean, spinach is the only one you really got to worry about, right?
yeah, but again, I don't think we have evidence of a widespread problem of people being like mineral deficient from compounds in foods, whether it's fiber or oxalates or whatever else is purported to inhibit absorption. And we have to remember that when we talk about absorption, we're never absorbing 100%. There's a lot we don't know. And even the studies we have that have looked at that, like there's, it's not a huge body of research. A lot of times they are looking at people in developing countries who have a totally different, situation than those of us not in developing countries. And that's also another aspect, say, with protein bioavailability. So there's some claim that, if you eat plant protein, you need more of it. There's a lot of debate about how much protein we need, and there's different scenarios where you may need more. The RDA is designed to provide 98% of the population with what they need. There's some nutrients we don't have a specific amount for. We only have research showing what appear to be adequate amounts. So there's a lot of gray and fuzzy area about what we need, and you can definitely always debate that. But our outcome, if we're not seeing clinical deficiencies, some health condition or symptom caused by foods, we just look at our health outcomes. What are the foods that lower our risk of the diseases we die from? And we know what those are, and those are whole plant foods.
Now, some like a woman who's maybe having a heavy menstruation might be concerned about iron absorption and maybe things inhibiting that, like tannins or oxalates. So maybe they can increase absorption through like citrusy foods, right? So there's things like that that can be done. But generally speaking, if somebody doesn't have any sort of pre-existing condition, do they even need to worry about any of this?
Yeah, I think that people definitely get nitpicky about some little thing. I mean, I think the most common question I get asked are, am I losing nutrients if I don't steam my vegetables? And I think the thing with steaming vegetables is most people like their vegetables to be softer, not mushy, but softer, easier to eat rather than hard to eat. It just depends on the nutrient you're talking about. So I always recommend that people, boil your vegetables in water. Use that water for soup, like save whatever nutrients may have gotten, leached out in the soup, which might be some minerals. Some nutrients are not affected by heat at all. Some are, kind of depends on what you're talking about.
Like the water-soluble ones, right?
Water-soluble vitamins, yeah. But the thing is, if you're eating a lot of whole plant foods and healthy food, whole foods in general, your body's going to take what it needs. You're providing yourself, we don't measure these things in ourselves. In some cases, we don't even have ways to measure some of these, whether we're getting enough of certain nutrients. And a lot of people take supplements, stuffing more nutrients in them, again, being a guinea pig, not really knowing if they need them or how much they might need and how much they should take, depending on how much they might need. So eating whole foods is definitely the way to nourish yourself. And we probably don't need to worry too much about it. But saying that, there are certain tests you should probably get on a regular basis, such as a full iron panel if you're a woman who is menstruating, because you do lose iron in your blood. If you're having heavy periods, you actually, even if you're eating liver, you can't eat your way out of severe anemia. You have to supplement, and that should always be done with a doctor's supervision, because you don't want to get too much iron, because too much iron is detrimental. But also regular B12 tests. As far as our omega-3 fatty acids, the research we have suggesting that vegans are not getting enough DHA. We don't have enough research on it. We have a few observational studies, I think. And again, these are kind of long studies that are looking at dementia. I mean, we know that people who are plant-based appear to have a better quality of life and live longer and live healthier to the end. And that includes no dementia. So if it was a problem, we would probably be seeing a higher prevalence. But yes, you're right. I think we do get people tend to get nitpicky about certain things when in fact we just need to be eating whole, healthy plant foods.
So do I need to worry about trying to get all these nutrients every day, or is it over the course of a week? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So yes, our recommendations for nutrients are called dietary reference intakes, which the RDA is one of them, recommended daily allowance. I think it was daily allowance, and then it became dietary allowance. I have to look that up. Generally, we look at over time. So generally things balance out. So that's one reason why when we do food logs, and especially in research, if you're just looking at 1 day or 3 days, it's not necessarily an accurate depiction of what you're getting. And we try to do 7 days ideally or more. So we are kind of looking at more over time. So you're gonna have probably a lot on 1 day and maybe less on another day, and that will hopefully balance out.
Yeah, because it's kind of misleading then to say daily,
Yes.
when it's more like maybe weekly or something.
Right, yeah, and some vitamins and minerals are, stored in like something like B12. You actually have stores that takes a few years for you to become deficient in. So if you're not getting enough in a week, you're probably going to be okay.
Now, I hear mixed things on soil quality. Some people say, oh, the soil's depleted of nutrients, and those fruits and vegetables you have are void, whatever, not what they used to be. But then I've also heard a really educated guy that I follow, a Nutrivore on YouTube. He says if they didn't have enough vitamins, they wouldn't grow to be a healthy plant. So how do you feel about like our food? Is it going to have enough nutrients in it based on the depleted, in theory, soil?
Yeah. Well, so the reason that nutrients are in plants is not to give us nutrients, it's to support the growth and function of that plant. So while there might be diminished amounts in different situations of different nutrients, there cannot be no nutrients. Same with like if you're steaming your vegetables versus boiling them in water. You might lose some nutrients, but it doesn't mean there's no nutrients in there. And as far as the soil, I'm not an expert in soil, but from what I understand, yes, soil can have different levels of quality, and that's one reason all sorts of different farming practices happen, like rotating your crops and doing different kinds of fertilizers or whatever. I don't, I'm not an expert in that. With our modern food system, there are problems for sure. And even transporting our produce, right? You lose nutrients the longer something, is out of the ground. But we're still getting nutrients, right? It's...
Yeah, and since we get a surplus and don't absorb it all, it's probably fine.
Yeah,
right?
And some things we just can't measure anyway. So again,
yeah.
Eat healthy plant foods, and you're probably getting what you need as long as
Yeah, my doctor ended up saying don't get caught in the weeds and reductionism. Even Colin Campbell wrote a book on it, Whole, right?
Yes.
And he's against reductionism.
Yeah.
What about children? Do we have to worry about raising children this way?
I think the first thing we need to realize is that our babies, our kids, our teenagers are not baby cows. We're not baby cows either. So why everybody is being fed baby cow fluid, I don't know. There is calcium in baby cow fluid, in milk and milk products, but there's also ingredients that are highly inflammatory. I think that that's one aspect of feeding our kids. Personally, I would recommend that no child consume any milk, any dairy at all. And, probably proof in the pudding that our children, our human babies, are not meant to eat dairy products. We don't give milk to babies because it makes them sick. In fact, there's a class action lawsuit happening right now. I keep hearing the commercial for it, that if your baby suffered some severe intestinal consequences from being fed some formula that had milk in it or dairy in it, contact these lawyers because we're gonna sue for you and make lots of money. So I think in terms of dairy, we definitely should not be giving children dairy. There's the big argument, are they going to get enough calcium? And the dairy industry definitely likes to push the fact that dairy foods are high in calcium, and we know growing children need calcium as the reason for why children and everybody should have calcium. There's a debate about how much calcium we need, just as there is a debate about other nutrients. Our recommendation in the US for the recommended amount of calcium is 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. In the UK, it's 700 milligrams a day. In other countries, they've found evidence of people eating about 500 milligrams a day and not having osteoporosis, so their bones not being affected by that. We know that bone health is affected by other nutrients, including the vitamin D we produce from exposure from the sun, as well as other minerals, and most importantly, exercise and impact or weight-bearing exercise. So there's lots of factors with that. I feel personally very strongly about dairy because I know for 99% certainty that I would still have my tonsils if I hadn't been drinking milk as a 5-year-old, because I was getting chronic bronchitis, inflammation, phlegm, issues breathing, and so my tonsils were removed because they were inflamed, and that got better, but then I got asthma. And then when I took the milk away, the dairy products, I cured my asthma. So I know that like as a 5-year-old, that wouldn't have even been an issue. Speaking to different plant-based pediatricians, they tell me that kids don't, that the kids with ear infections, sometimes that require surgery, they have them stop drinking milk and eating dairy products, it goes away, they don't need the surgery. I think that, it's definitely a problem giving dairy products. Saying that, I'm not a pediatrician. As far as a plant-based diet, it's pretty evident that our kids and our bodies, our human bodies, flourish from a plant-based diet. If you've raised your child young, learning to eat all the plant foods, they will like the plant foods, because kids are famously neophobic. They don't like new and different foods. A big problem, though, is processed food with kids, too. So, we have some people that have successfully written books about how they've successfully raised their kids as vegans. And I think, we need more research on that. There have been some negative media reports on a few parents who supposedly raised their kids vegan, and they had some terrible health consequences. I don't remember the details, but it turns out that in one case I remember reading about, they were actually starving their child. It wasn't that the child was vegan. The child was just not being fed, and when the child was being fed, it was not enough calories, and it was
applesauce or something.
Yeah, it was some sort of
that was it.
some food that was a plant-based food, but they were actually starving. So it was they probably should be put in jail basically for starving the food. It wasn't that they were eating a vegan diet. So, sometimes when we see headlines like that, we have to delve into the details and see actually what happened, not how it was reported.
RDAs, those were based on normal people, right? So, do they even really know what a vegan needs?
Yeah. Okay. So the thing with it used to be called the Institute of Medicine, IOM. Now it's called the Academy of Medicine, AOM. They are the ones responsible for what are known as the dietary reference intakes, the DRIs. And the DRIs are recommendations for how much of the essential nutrients we need. The research that tells us how much of the different nutrients we need goes back years, right? And you can actually look up the reports and look at where they, you can get the full list of the research they looked at. So you look up the Dietary Reference Intakes website, and you can literally download PDFs for each of the nutrients, from fats, protein, and fiber, and essential amino acids, carbohydrates,
all of them,
to all the vitamins and minerals. And what you'll see when you read that is that, again, it's a bunch of different research. It's certainly flawed. Some studies may not have enough people in them. Some studies may not have enough of different types of populations, whether that's people of color or different ethnicities, or vegans, or people, in certain environments. So the way the DRIs work is that every so often they will decide, okay, let's review the new research on a certain nutrient and decide if we need to change our recommendations for how much of that nutrient is needed. And that was done recently with vitamin D. there was about, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, people started getting very interested in vitamin D, which is a hormone, and our body makes it based on exposure from the sun. It's in some foods, but not many, and really our primary source is meant to be our body making it from exposure to the sun. But suddenly there was a lot of interest in vitamin D, and there were all these people saying, oh, you should take massive amounts of vitamin D, and your levels should be much higher if you take a blood test than is currently recommended, and there's still people that believe that. So the Institute of Medicine, IOM at the time, now Academy of Medicine, decided, okay, let's convene a panel of nutrition researchers and experts and review the latest evidence and see if we need to reevaluate how much we're recommended that people get. And simultaneously, there was a lot of research finding, mostly observational studies, finding correlations between levels of vitamin D and lots of different diseases. So they were finding that, people with heart disease may have lower levels of vitamin D. People with depression may have lower levels of vitamin D. People with all sorts of different conditions have been linked to low levels of vitamin D. We've seen that with COVID. People say, low levels of vitamin D. The only known and proven disease related to vitamin D intake is bone health. We know that vitamin D is really important for bone health, and that's why you see when you buy a calcium supplement, it's usually paired with vitamin D, so you're getting both for your bones, right? Well, they convened a panel of experts to review the research, and I think that last time they had done that prior, I'm a little fuzzy, but I think it was at least 10 years earlier, maybe even longer. So the evidence hadn't been reviewed in a long time, and they reviewed all the evidence, and you can actually pull up that report to see what they looked at. And their conclusion was that the only research that we have solid evidence for of a causal effect between vitamin D and that health outcome, that disease, is that vitamin D affects bone health. So we need vitamin D for bone health. All of these other conditions, and anecdotally, you'll hear people say, I started taking vitamin D and I wasn't depressed anymore, or whatever. The evidence wasn't solid enough. The research studies out there that had been done at the time they reviewed it didn't show that to be the case. It might still be the case, but we need more research. So with all of our nutrient recommendations, when there's further evidence, they will be updated. It doesn't happen, over a 2-year period. It might happen over a 20 or 30-year period. I do think our fiber recommendations, I think fiber will become essential as opposed to just recommended, but actually an essential nutrient. And I think our intakes will be bumped up, like we need more fiber than we currently, are recommended to get.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I asked is because when I was tracking my nutrients, I noticed like calcium, like you mentioned, and I asked Neil Bernard about that, in particular, and he kind of said the same thing you said. Maybe some other things too that might be a little more challenging to get, but only if you're trying to do that. So aren't most of these studies predominantly not based on vegans though? So we don't really know if a vegan needs maybe the same amount.
Yeah, I would say it's safe to say that all of the research that we have that has given us our current dietary recommendations are not looking at vegans and what they need, primarily. So the general recommendations are not that. Now, there are some random, studies that may have occurred that will lead people to believe that, maybe people in different conditions, situations might need more or less of a certain nutrient. Like we know smokers may need more vitamin C. But yeah, in general, for our general recommendations, they're a little fuzzy. And then the phytochemicals, those aren't even in there, and we know they're beneficial for health. We don't know what happens when we don't get them. I guess once we get long-term carnivore research, we will find out, right?
Yeah, because these carnivores aren't getting scurvy.
Yeah. Well, and we don't necessarily know that. I mean, the one research study we have, they're self-reporting. What about the ones that weren't included in that study? Did they get? I mean, we don't know. I don't know. I think there's, right now we have anecdotal evidence. Is it safe to say someone can eat carnivore and experience some beneficial effects? It appears some people can. We don't know about all people, because it could be that of the 2,000. I think they collected about 4,000 people in the beginning, and then they didn't include in their actual analysis all of those for a variety of reasons. What if there have been, 20,000 people that tried it but only 2,000 experienced those beneficial effects? I mean, we just don't have any of that data. We don't have the kind of research that would tell us.
You said fiber is not an essential nutrient. Sometimes I hear, well, carbohydrates aren't an essential nutrient. But now if you look at the acceptable distribution of macronutrient range, the recommendation on the bottom end of carbohydrates is higher than fat and protein on their higher. So
Right.
It's not essential, but they're recommending you get far more carbohydrates.
Right. So I think the reason carbohydrate is not officially considered an essential nutrient is because glucose, which is an essential nutrient for our brain and red blood cells, can be obtained by breaking things down in our body, right? Biochemical reactions can produce glucose when we need it. I think that proof is in the pudding that our body needs carbohydrates because our brain relies exclusively on carbohydrates. Glucose is the fuel that's needed by the brain and red blood cells. We can, when that is lacking, whether it's from starvation or a low-carb diet where glucose is deprived, go into an alternative metabolic state called ketosis. Fat is converted into ketones, and that can be used as a fuel for the brain. That's a emergency and starvation state. There are some people who, when talking about fasting and intermittent fasting, believe that we are naturally designed to be in ketosis more often. And so it's therefore not necessarily only a starvation state or emergency state, but it's something that we would be in if we didn't have food that's everywhere all the time, as we do in our modern life. Naturally, we know that you're in a little bit of ketosis when you wake up in the morning because you haven't eaten all night. And it depends on, what you're eating and when you last ate. Some people believe we would be in ketosis for longer, just naturally, and maybe that's true. But saying that, our brain still needs glucose and prefers glucose, and that's its first fuel of choice. If ketones were the optimal fuel of choice, we would always be in ketosis, arguably, right? I think there's a lot we don't know about that, but the fact that we have carb digesting enzymes in our saliva to begin with, right when we put something in our mouth, and our brain prefers glucose and exclusively relies on it, except when there's a starvation or lack of calories or lack of carbs, it can exist on something else, but it can't even use fat. So fat needs glucose to be metabolized. So they say fat burns in a carbohydrate flame. So that's why we have glycogen, glucose stored in our liver and in our muscles. We have stores of it. It's stored in our body so we can use it, right? Because our body needs it. So I think that, there's no denying we need carbohydrates.
So awesome. So we wake up, we're in this hungry state, and the next thing you know, we're able to go through gluconeogenesis. Is that how you say it?
Gluconeogenesis.
Yeah. Until we can actually get those carbohydrates, and then the preferred fuel source, right, switches over, right?
Yeah. So our body has so many different ways biochemically to create glucose from all sorts of different reactions. Gluconeogenesis being one of them. We create glucose from different breakdown of other molecules. Our body needs glucose, so.
Yeah. You have written how many books?
8.
8 books. What are those?
A series of fitness books and a couple nutrition, but the last 2 were Lean Mommy and Cross Training for Dummies.
Oh, cool. And how can we find those?
Oh, they're on Amazon. They're old. I was writing books in my 20s and early 30s. And then I went back to graduate school and got my master's and Ph.D. and then started doing other things. So it's been a while, although I'm working on a new one. So.
So are they still relevant?
Cross Training for Dummies. It's all about how it's important to do a variety of things when you work out in a variety of ways. So you're getting all of your, again, optimal physical fitness as opposed to just primarily focusing on one system, and decreasing your risk of injury by doing a variety of things and not doing too much of any one thing.
Now, some of these carnivore people that are really in shape, maybe some of the benefits they're getting is they're working out so much and to compensate for whatever's going on with their diet. Could some of the benefit there be the fact that they're exercising? I guess there's really no way to control for that, is there?
Exercise is vitally important. I have heard some plant-based doctors say it's not as important as eating right. I don't agree with that. They're both vitally important. We are designed to move, and in our modern culture, we move less and less, and we atrophy because of that. And maybe a more nutrient-dense diet is going to slow down the rate of atrophy, whether that's muscle loss, sarcopenia, or bone loss, or other things just becoming weaker or less powerful or having less stamina. Maybe a plant-based diet can slow down the rate of loss in those different things. But we need to move. And so it's important that we move and do all sorts of different things: strength training, resistance training, and cardio exercise. And that can be, different approaches for different people. The one thing, though, we need to be careful of, though, is assuming that we see someone and they're really sculpted and strong and have muscles and they're fit, that means they're healthy on the inside. Mm-hmm. We have some famous examples where that was not the case. One of the early examples was in the 70s. There was a guy named Jim Fixx, and he was a runner, and he was a famous runner. I think he wrote a book, but he died of a heart attack. And everyone jumped on that saying, see, that means running isn't good for you. He still had a heart attack. It's not necessarily good for your heart. Well, we know that what you eat has a huge effect on his heart. And my guess is he was eating a lot of animal foods, right? Most recently, we had Bob Harper, who was a trainer on The Biggest Loser. Really great physique, perfectly sculpted, strong, fit. He had a heart attack or a stroke as well. He had been, in recent years prior to that, promoting a low-carb diet. So we have to be careful of assuming that the people who look really good and have great muscles and are fit, that automatically means that their insides are in shape. Now, fitness will do a lot of things for you, and it absolutely decreases your disease risk for lots of chronic diseases, including diabetes and heart disease. It certainly helps keep you in shape. But what you eat is important too. However, saying that, what you eat, if you're not exercising, isn't going to, completely protect you from getting weaker, having less stamina, getting osteoporosis. We are designed to move. And in cultures that aren't modern, where they're doing activities of daily living that involve resistance training and cardio, they're walking and they're pulling and they're scrubbing and they're lifting heavy things, they're exercising even if they're not in a gym doing it. They're exercising in their daily life. I think that some people assume that their diet is enough if they're eating nutritiously and a plant-based diet, but it's super important to exercise every day.
Is there a line where it's like you could do exercise too much, or it's just this is an adequate amount, or this is an ideal amount, and you don't really need to do much more than that?
It kind of depends on what you're talking about, right? What you're measuring. So what is your outcome? If you're just looking at lowering your risk of getting a chronic disease or improving your mortality, how long you live, then less exercise seems to be enough, and depends on what studies you're looking at. But in general, say doing 150 minutes of exercise a week. So 30 minutes 5 days a week of walking, and you can break that up. 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the day. That seems to be enough to improve your health. That is definitely not going to help you lose weight. That is definitely not going to
prevent sarcopenia,
the loss of muscle. It's not going to make you stronger. It's not going to prevent osteoporosis. But it's good enough for health risks. Definitely, the more exercise you do, the better. The harder exercise you do, the better. But that has to be done gradually and carefully, and keeping in mind whatever your personal limitations might be. Higher intensities are important because there's different physiological effects of getting your heart rate up really high or lifting a heavy weight, you're actually activating different and more muscle fibers. If you lift a heavier weight, you're activating different physiological systems and muscle fibers if you work at a high intensity when you're doing cardio. That said, you don't have to run a marathon. In fact, maybe running a marathon has some, or doing long endurance activities can have some detrimental effects, not necessarily only from the pounding, but with your immune system. Although research has shown with that, if you eat carbs while you're doing your long endurance event, you're actually going to have a better, stronger immune system from that high intensity, stressful exercise. But we're designed to work, we're designed to walk, run, and jump. We should be walking, running, and jumping and pushing ourselves. It doesn't mean you have to do it for hours a day, it just means a little bit at a time. With weightlifting, there's some evidence that we should be lifting very heavy weights, but even if you do it like once every 2 weeks, you don't necessarily have to be doing it 3 days a week or 5 days a week with split routines where you're, working all the different body parts. I mean, you're going to get stronger if you do that, but you can still, it's all about giving your body the stimulus. And you have to be doing these things so your brain gets the message that, oh, I need to be equipped to handle this stress, this load, this amount of intensity. So as long as you're giving your body a regular dose of it, your brain will send messages to all your body parts, your muscles and heart and lungs and everything else, your circulation, your blood vessels, to adapt to be able to withstand that load. So it's important, our modern life engineers activity out of it. So we do have to use exercise machines or gyms or whatever, make ourselves go out and run or play a sport in order to keep all of these systems, physiological systems, active and strong.
Some people give vegans that are overweight or look overweight, they give them a hard time, but can you look overweight and actually still be totally healthy?
75% of the adult population is overweight or obese in America. The vast majority of those people are eating meat. So probably 90 to 95% of those people are eating meat. If you see a vegan who is overweight or even obese, that does not mean that eating vegan is going to make you overweight or obese, because in fact the opposite appears to be true, and we have studies that show that you're more likely to be lean if you are eating vegan or vegetarian even. Looking at someone and telling what they are like in the inside, whether they're healthy or not, we do know that having excess fat brings health risks to it. There's a lot that's been discovered about body fat. 20 years ago, nobody knew it was an endocrine organ. Fat cells actually make hormones. And 30 years ago, people thought fat cells were just a storage depot for excess fat, excess calories that we ate. If we eat more than we burn each day, then whether it's extra protein calories, extra carb calories, or extra fat calories, they will get stored in our body as fat. And our fat cells are the depot for that. And it used to be thought that that's what fat cells did. That was their function. Now we know that fat cells produce lots of different hormones. The first hormone that it was discovered that fat cells produced was leptin, but we know that there's lots of other hormones, and they all play a role in energy expenditure, how much you eat, how much you move. They fluctuate according to how much weight you have, and when you lose weight, they change as well. Eating more calories than you burn will cause you to gain weight and gain excess fat. A vegan can do that as easily as the average American who's eating meat, or the average person who's not trying to actively diet and who's not very active physically. The majority of the population is also sedentary, and that would, probably include the majority of vegans as well. When we don't move enough, our body is going to be more apt to store fat rather than burn it. And now that we have more vegan processed foods, which on the one hand is good, it's certainly helping save animal lives, and it's certainly helping younger people who don't care about their health as much to go vegan, and helping people who want to go vegan but need those transition foods or just need to have comfort foods and foods that they're used to eating. So we have lots of vegan junk foods, but the downside of that with all the processed foods is people are eating more calories as opposed to just eating a lot of vegetables and beans and fruit. We definitely can have someone who is overweight. Sometimes the latest thinking on that, it used to be thought that you could have something called the metabolically healthy obese person, MHO. And it was thought that they don't have poor cholesterol, they're not diabetic, they appear to be healthy. And there's a couple of things. If they're fat but fit, it appears that they may be healthier than someone who is skinny but unfit. So that's, again, where exercise plays a big role in our health as well as what we eat. But also with excess body fat and being obese, it's now being seen that they might be healthy now, but we know that with chronic disease, it's a progressive thing with our different chronic diseases. So things are gurgling beneath the scenes, and probably there's going to be some disease outcomes that develop. And at the very least, there's probably fatty liver, which is one place where the fat will accumulate when you have excess fat in your diet, or excess calories that are stored as fat, which will have its own health consequences down the line. Could be gallbladder disease. There could be lots of outcomes, and they just haven't yet developed.
I saw an interesting thing Gregor mentioned, that if you compare a vegan with the same BMI as a non-vegan, the vegan has less intracellular lipid or visceral fat. So in that sense, they may be less likely to have like diabetes or,
Maybe, yeah. And I just was listening to a conference the other day, and it was talking about how, you can take like biopsies and see how much, you can have different levels of like saturated fat and unsaturated fat in your membranes and everything, and cell membranes. Exercise will preferentially apparently burn more saturated fat. So I haven't actually seen that study, but what we eat certainly plays a role. And if we're putting less of the bad stuff in, our body doesn't have to deal with that and store it or, be affected by it.
Mm-hmm. I have some friends who are trying to, they try to lose weight, and they don't even take diet into consideration. They just go straight to exercise. Is that dangerous?
Dangerous?
Well, yeah. I mean, I imagine you're putting all this garbage in you, and then now you're trying to exercise, and I just assume that just doesn't seem like a healthy thing to do.
So I think it's a myth that you can't lose weight from exercise. You can. You just have to do a lot of it. My favorite example is...
Well, I'm not saying they can't lose weight. I'm just wondering if it's dangerous. I mean, wouldn't it be better to kind of, maybe do the diet first and then exercise?
No, because exercise is like taking 1,000 different drugs. The benefits of exercise are immense on every system in your body, from your brain to different systems, right?
I'm imagining the heart trying to pump, and you're putting all this stuff in your blood that's pushing it through harder.
Again, someone can exercise and eat crap, and that doesn't mean they might look good, they might be fit, they might, win marathons. Like, okay, Michael Phelps, Olympic athlete, right, swimmer, who claims to eat 10,000 calories a day, or he did in his prime, which is a lot, right? That's 5 times more than the average person. And he is super tall, too. I forget how tall he is. But you think he's eating 10,000 calories of whole plant foods? No. He's, I think, probably eating a lot of junk food in that 10,000 calories, because that's the way you can get that many calories in, right? And he's still winning Olympic medals doing that. Whether you can be healthy eating meat, and certainly being a carnivore eating mostly or all meat, forgets the most important thing, that, why cause suffering and pain and murder when you don't have to?
Now, is there any reason you would want anybody to look you up in case, they want to reach out for any reason? And how could they do that if so? Are you on social media?
I am.
And do you want people to connect for any reason? Maybe, no?
They can,
for your next book, maybe?
Yeah, for next book. But
when's that coming out, maybe?
Oh, it was supposed to come out a long time ago.
Oh, man.
Yeah. No, I'm on Facebook and Twitter, but
Okay.
And I'm on Instagram. I never go on it. But
anything we didn't talk about that you want to share and get out there, or any last minute encouraging words?
Well, you had asked about cooking methods and stuff. One of the things I think that's really important, is just that you eat more plant foods. And there's lots of vegans, including myself, that don't always eat as many, greens as we should, right? You get busy. Do the bulk preparation, find ways to make it easier for yourself to eat healthy. So for example, one thing I've done is I'll go to an Asian restaurant and get side orders of brown rice and then put them in the freezer. So, or, that's when I don't have time to cook a big pot and then put some in different plastic containers and then put those in the freezer or the fridge and then bulk prep, right? Eat canned beans, eat frozen vegetables, have all those things on hand, have seeds, put seeds on everything. Seeds are so nutritious, and we're just finding out, I think, how nutritious they are. And it's very easy to sprinkle lots of them all over the place on whatever you're eating. Even if it's a sandwich or a cereal or oatmeal or pasta or vegetables, soup, yeah, everything. You can sprinkle them on pretty much everything in your smoothie. So I think that's the most important thing, is try to figure out how to make it easier for yourself to eat more, because what's more important than worrying about, are you absorbing every nutrient because you're cooking it the right way and you're mixing, you're putting the pepper with the turmeric or the, citrus with your, iron containing food. Generally probably things you're eating are going to have those combinations anyway. It's just important to eat what you need. And it's very easy to eat things that then crowd out your ability to eat the healthy foods. And I must say, I've taught, I don't know an exact number, but thousands of students nutrition. And I've seen thousands of diet logs from students. And I would say that hands down, the students that eat the most plant foods always have the highest nutrient intakes. The students that eat the most animal foods always have the lowest nutrient intakes when I'm looking at their diet analyses and their diet logs. There's also an awful lot of processed and junk food being eaten, and we're starting to get more research on how detrimental processed and junk food is. And the one thing that I definitely see a correlation between fiber intake and nutrient intake. And whenever I'm looking at someone's nutrient profile, the minute I see low fiber, I know they're going to be deficient in a lot of vitamins and minerals. And usually they're not deficient in protein. The only reason they're deficient in protein is usually because they're not eating enough calories. So they're under eating, which definitely for a student population can happen very easily, especially for women, but not even exclusively the girls or women. Once you eat something, even if it's like some candy or ice cream or whatever it is, you're kind of full, or French fries or whatever you're eating that's like a junk food. And then you don't want to eat that big plate of broccoli that you should be eating. So as a rule, eat the healthy thing first and have the junk or processed food sparingly and later.
It's killing me. How much protein do we need? It's supposed to be like 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, right? But somehow that's changed here recently.
The RDA, the dietary reference intake for protein, is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. That is meant to satisfy the needs of 98% of the population. That is how that is defined. There are different conditions where research has shown we may need more than that, right? And some people think, oh, we definitely need more than that. But for people that exercise, the range appears to be, according to some research evidence, 1.2 grams up to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So maybe up to double the RDA. Most people are getting double the RDA. The RDA is not that much, especially if you're eating enough whole plant foods to match what your body is burning each day, your total energy expenditure. And if you're eating animal products, which do contain more protein in general, you're meeting that. So I see people that are deficient in all sorts of nutrients, but they're getting lots of protein. People do not need to be taking protein supplements. Meat eaters or non-meat eaters, for the most part. Now, the higher intakes, so there's other conditions. So if vegans need more protein, they're probably already getting enough protein. People that are sick and healing need more calories and sometimes more protein. There's different conditions where you may need more protein, and But generally, most people are getting double the amount of protein they need, according to the RDA. So all these people that say, oh, you need more than the RDA, well, most people are getting more than the RDA, and you don't really need to even supplement to get it. Now, a raw vegan might want to track it, and usually they'll want to do something like, eat like lots of seeds on things. Seeds are very high in protein. Sprinkle those on everything. Nuts. They're already eating large amounts of fruits and vegetables, which do contain protein. You just have to eat a lot of them to get the amounts you need, which if that's all they're eating 2,000 calories worth of raw plant foods, right? The one thing to keep in mind too, when we have these comparisons between, there's more or less protein in a plant or an animal food, first of all, absolutely animal foods have more protein. That is not in question, per portion. But there's a lot of misleading info about that. Number one, do we need huge amounts of protein? So we might need more than the RDA, but that's not a huge amount, right? Some people, I see some people who are thinking they need 250 grams of protein a day. The evidence generally doesn't support that unless you're a really tall, overweight person, you might need that much. Usually, if they're getting that much, it's at the expense of other nutrients. Protein isn't the only essential nutrient in our body. We have a whole list of them. And every cell needs all of those nutrients to operate properly and to perform the various functions that go on. So we have definitely an overemphasis on protein. And I do recommend that you read Proteinaholic by Dr. Garth Davis. I have all my students read that book because I think it's such an important book to understand. But the other thing with protein, so to keep in mind, I know there's been like memes going around between like comparing broccoli to beef and what has the most protein. And then there's different memes on the internet where they're saying, oh, look at how much protein plant foods have, and they'll compare like all the different foods have so many grams per 100 grams. The thing to keep in mind, you can get lost in all those semantics, is there's protein and there's a complete essential amino acid profile in every plant food. You just have to eat enough of it. And if you're eating primarily or wholly plant foods, and they're healthy plant foods, not processed junk, not potato chips and french fries and candy, then you're going to be getting what you need. You have to match your calorie intake and eat unprocessed foods.
And you'll be getting all the other stuff too that you need.
Yeah,
and not too much of any one in particular.
Right. And also it's important to realize that most dietitians, registered dietitians who have studied nutrition and they're considered to be authorities, most dietitians, all they need is a bachelor's degree to be a registered dietitian. There has now been a new rule by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the organization that provides the certification for people to become an RD, registered dietitian, where as of, I think it's 2024, everyone will need a master's degree in order to qualify as a registered dietitian.
As of when? 24?
I think it'll be implemented in 2024, right? So, but now all you need is a bachelor's degree. As a professor with a Ph.D. and 2 master's degrees, I can tell you that as a bachelor's degree, you don't learn a lot. It's a minimum level of education. It does not convey a huge level of academic expertise. You don't study how to, you take one statistics class. That's, barely anything. It's not like semesters and semesters of how to interpret statistics and research studies, right? So while it's a really good standard to have, and it's going to become a better standard once people get master's degrees, even a master's degrees. With a master's degree, in my experience, you are learning more factual information, but you're still not highly qualified to read and interpret research. That comes at the doctoral level, because that's when you're taking a lot of statistics and research design classes and all that stuff. I like to point that out because even people with the qualifications to be giving advice, sometimes, their expertise is not as high as you would assume it to be. Our nutrition qualifications are still better than the fitness industry, where literally you could take a weekend workshop and take an exam and you're a personal trainer, right? At least with the nutrition industry, we have like a certain level and you have to at least have a bachelor's degree, which is good. But anyway, just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, we have all sorts of people who don't have any expertise, or they have expertise in other areas where they haven't studied nutrition, but they're suddenly experts in nutrition. And we certainly have a lot of doctors in that realm. And, you know, the plant-based doctors all openly acknowledge that they didn't know about nutrition, right? Until they started, you know, studying it. And they certainly have the academic expertise to learn faster and study and understand more. But anyway, just something to keep in mind when you're, you know, hearing advice and scientific information from people. Yeah, I was just thinking about that video I was watching about the girl on YouTube who was reporting on that carnivore study. What did she say? Oh, I think I pointed that out already, that she said, oh, and they even got lab results. So this is real.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, they didn't get lab results. They just had people tell what their lab results
Yeah.
were, you know?
Yeah, some of these doctors in the carnivore movement, they don't have any, like, if you try to do a comparison between them and the plant-based doctors, the plant-based doctors have clinical experience with thousands of patients over decades and irrelevant education a lot of times, you know, lifestyle medicine or something. And these carnivore doctors, I have yet to see one that has any relevant clinical experience or education or
really?
anything. I mean, I haven't. Like
it's all
Dr. Baker's like the king of it all, and he was like
He's an orthopedic surgeon. And he's not even a doctor anymore, right? He got kicked out or something?
He lost his license.
In fact, he participated in that study. So they were his people, looks like, that he helped formulate the questions for that study or something.
Yeah. And I don't think he's never worked in a clinical environment with people that have these chronic diseases that these nutrients that he says you're getting are sufficient in animals.
Right. Yeah.
Is there any reason at all we need to eat animals?
I mean, I think the only argument is the B12, but again, that breaks down when we hear that, oh, omnivores need to supplement with B12. Oh, and farm animals where we get our B12 are supplemented with B12. So honestly, if I found out that being a vegan was unhealthy for me, I would still be a vegan because I can't contribute. I think that I cannot contribute to the torture and pain and suffering of innocent animals.
Wow.
The enslavement, torture, pain, and suffering, and murder of innocent animals.
It's so important not to forget that.
Yeah.